This tutorial will demonstrate how to change the position and visual properties of core sections and go over some general navigation tips. So now we have several images and tracks loaded here. And you'll notice that when you click a section on the visualization canvas, it becomes selected and the corresponding section in the session window also becomes selected. So if I change here, you can see that the selection changed there, and the opposite is also true. If I change the selection in the session window, the highlighted core in the canvas will also change. So you can select one or more sections at a time within a single track. So multiple selection does work. So I could, for example, if I hold down Shift here, I'll select the first 3 sections in this track, and you can see the canvas selection corresponds to that. I could select all 6. I could use Command or Control to deselect a few of them. So you can do any selection of sections within a track. And that also applies when clicking in the canvas. I click this. If I hold Shift now, it should select the first 4. I could hold down Command and deselect this one. Both in the canvas and the session window, multiple selection behaves essentially the same way. So that's how you select things to manipulate. And then I'll show you the basic ways to change the position of tracks and cores using that selection. So to reposition a track, you hold down the Shift key and drag a track up and down, or whatever the non-depth axis is. And you'll notice that even though I only have a single core selected here, Corelyzer will move the entire track, and that's because Corelyzer wants to keep the contents of that track together. So in this case, actually, selection doesn't really matter. I could select any of these, and the whole core will, whole track will come along for the ride. So you just hold the Shift key and drag to do that adjustment. So for example, we have, here's track 1A, here's track 1D, and 1C is down here, so maybe I want to move track 1D below. So now we're in alphabetical order A, C, and D here. So that's how you manipulate tracks. That's pretty straightforward. And then you can also move individual cores along the depth axis. And you do that by holding on Mac, it's the Option key. On Windows, it's the Alt key. And then similarly to dragging tracks, I'm holding down that button, and now I'm dragging along the depth axis. So now I'm adjusting the position of this core, the depth axis. I can go any direction I want. And this selection does apply here. So if I select these 2 cores, for example, now they both move together. If I add this to the selection, now all 3 will move together, maintaining their relative positions. I could do something like this. I could move these 2 cores independent of all the other cores in that track. So again, that's holding down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows and dragging along the depth axis will adjust the position of the selected sections on the depth axis. If you have an older project, you may not be able to drag these along the depth axis. And the reason for that is that in older versions of Corelyzer, imported cores were locked by default. Their position was locked. You can get around that by selecting a core and right-clicking, and you should see a check mark next to lock section here. That would indicate that the section is locked, and that's why you can't drag along the x-axis, or sorry, the depth axis with the Alt or Option dragging. So let's just, as an example, I will check lock section, and now I'm Alt dragging and it's not moving at all. So if I uncheck that, now it moves freely. So that's just something to be aware of if you have an older version of a project. Newer versions of Corelyzer do not lock core positions by default. There are many options in the right-click or context-click menu when you click on a core in the visualization canvas, and we'll highlight a few more of these right now. One of the most commonly used is the Properties dialog, which lets us control various visual aspects of the core. I'm going to highlight 2 of the most commonly used things here. The first is the visible interval area. Often cores include extraneous imagery that you may want to hide. In our case at the CSD facility, we always include this label and a color card, which is useful, but often for purposes of positioning cores in Corelyzer, folks want to hide that, and you can do that by adjusting the slider here. So I could just drag the slider and you can see it is cropping the end of this core. So let's that was about right. If you want something more precise, you can type in a value. If I want to do 136 here, for example. And so in that way we can hide that color card and label in that core. Now they haven't gone away. We haven't deleted those. We can easily bring them back just by expanding the slider back to the full length of the core. So no data has been lost by doing that. It's just you're just hiding it temporarily. You can do the same from the top of the core if you had extraneous imagery at the top of your core. So that is probably the single most commonly used portion of the properties dialog. Another very useful element of that dialog is suppose this core, for example, we moved it around just to demonstrate, but I want to move it such that its top is back at depth 0. I can get pretty close by dragging, but it's going to be hard to do it precisely. It's much easier to go into the properties dialog, and I can edit the top depth of that core. You can see I got pretty close, 0.011, but that's not 0. So if I just hit 0 here and hit apply, you can see it moved a bit, so now it is at exactly depth 0. So those are two of the most useful options in the properties dialog. As we were demonstrating moving of cores, of course these cores have become very spread out now. And if I want them to abut each other again, I could manually drag them and try and get them to touch each other just right, but again, it's going to be kind of fussy and it'll be very difficult to do precisely and accurately. So that is where another option in the menu, stack sections, comes in. So at the very bottom of the menu here, stack sections. So if I choose this option, here's what will happen. Warns me that it cannot be undone. We will continue. And as you can see, it now removed the gaps between this core and this core and this core and this core. It pushed them together so that they abut one another. And notice also that this core, which we hid the color card and label of, it took that into account. So it didn't place this core, here and include space for where the label and color card would be. It simply took the visual portions or visible portions of those cores and pulled them together. So again, if I stack sections here, we'll pull this back to that. The way stacking works is it operates from whatever core is selected and pulls everything lower than that core, deeper than that core over. So let's make some space here. So for example, if I just choose to stack from this core, it's only going to pull this core to the left such that it touches the bottom of the core I've selected. So let's just show that. So there it goes. If I start from here, it will pull everything, again, everything deeper will be pulled up so that it touches. Do this here. And notice that that also applies if things overlap. So for example, if this core is overlapping this core, it will push this core deeper such that they're non-overlapping. So if I do this, it pushes it back so that they're touching but not overlapping. So that is stack sections. That can be helpful if you've moved cores around and want to bring things back together. Bring this one back. Another useful option is trim sections, which is a way to basically to adjust the visible interval, but do it for more than one core at a time. So all three cores in our 1A track here have color cards. Let's say we wanted to hide all of those. We could use trim sections to do that. Let's just take a look here. So it looks like we want to trim about, that's 139 to 150 and a little more. So let's just say we want to trim about 12 centimeters of label and color card from the end of each of these sections. And it's not going to be perfectly consistent here, but it should get us pretty close. And if you have lots of cores, it might be a more efficient way to hide extraneous imagery than doing it one at a time with properties. So if I go to trim sections here, I'm going to choose to trim 12 centimeters from the bottom of selected and deeper sections. When I do this, you can see that now we've hidden the bottom 12 centimeters for each of those 3 cores, which did a pretty good job of getting those labels and color cards out of view. And now if I stack them, they should touch each other. If you trimmed too much, you could either go into the properties dialog, and as always, you could just extend the visible interval. So again, that data hasn't been lost; it's just being hidden. So we could, you can see now we see the full label and color card for our first core here. You could also use the trim dialog to restore that hidden portion of a core by using add instead of trim. So if I add 12 centimeters to the bottom of all my selections, it should restore the color cards that I removed completely. And as with visible interval in properties, you can also trim from the top. So I could trim 10 centimeters from the top of my cores if I wanted to. Why this is being so fussy? There we go. So again, there I hid the top 10 centimeters of this core, and this one, and the third one in that track. And as before, you can restore that. And if you try to restore more than what has been trimmed, so we trimmed 10 centimeters, if I try to add 100 centimeters to the top of these sections, it's just going to add what's available. It's not going to create additional imagery or make the core longer than it already was. It will just add as much as it can and then stop. So that's trimming sections, which is often a faster way to hide extraneous imagery in many cores at a time. And that is a per track operation, so I can do that for all of the cores in my 1C hole, for example. So you trim all of these, and we'll just assume that the color card is about 12. I just hit it for all of them. So that's not as accurate as doing it one at a time in the properties dialog, but often it is good enough and more efficient. Another option that can be useful at times, especially if you have positioned your cores such that there is some overlap, maybe instead of hiding the label and color card, you just position the core such that, so now the top of this sediment is actually sort of touching the bottom of the previous section sediment. It can be useful to, if you want to clearly see the ends of those cores, you can use the stagger sections option, which just pulls every other core up such that you can easily see the bottom of this core and the top of this core without them overlapping each other. And to unstagger them, you just return and unstagger. So that can be useful in some cases. So those are the most commonly used options in the right-click context menu when clicking on core images in the visualization canvas. There are also some right-click options when you click in the session window, and I'll highlight a couple of those quickly here. One of these is that in very large projects that have hundreds or even thousands of cores, it can be very difficult to pick out the one that is highlighted in yellow when you select it. You could have hundreds of meters worth of cores and it becomes rather difficult to pick out visually. To view that core quickly, you can right-click on the section and choose Locate. And doing that immediately zooms the view to that core, and yeah, it tries to draw it as large as it can, basically. You can also do that by just double-clicking a section name. So if I do this, it just takes me to the next section. So that's a quick way to jump from core to core or to a specific core. You can, if you right-click on a track, you can hide it. If you have a bunch of tracks and they're somehow obscuring each other, you could, if you just want to remove it from view, you can hide it. If you right-click again, you'll have a show option instead. You can rename tracks here as well. I'm not going to do that right now, but you could change the name if you wanted to. You could also delete this track and all the sections that are part of it, so that will just remove those entirely from the session. The same applies for sections. You could remove a single section from this track if you wanted to, using the delete option. And a couple more options. You can hide an entire session if you have multiple sessions open. That works the same way as hiding tracks. So we only have one session open right now, so now you just see nothing. Click and restore that. You can rename a session. This session was, as you can tell, the name is default. It was just created when I imported my first track because I did not create a session initially, and you don't need to, but if I want to name this something a little more meaningful, I could call it Glad4HSTO3, something like that. And finally, this is where if you wanted to close this session, yeah, you could do it from here. So those are some navigation options and ways to manipulate the position of tracks and cores. Just remind you that after you've made all these changes, if you want them to be reflected the next time you open Corelyzer and open your session, you'll need to save that session. And so I'm going to go to the File menu right now and save my session. So I'll say this on my desktop as it uses the default, the session name that I provided before, so I'm just going to save it as this. And so that will retain all of the images I have present and their relative positions. So if I close this now and reopen it, going to open session. There's my session file. If I open it up, there everything has been restored. So remember to save your session after making changes, whether it's adding images or repositioning things. Otherwise, those changes will be lost the next time you open the session. In the next tutorial, we'll demonstrate loading measurement data and plotting it on our core sections.